I don't think much of it, but I always look through it. Sometimes you run into something worthwhile. I always like the backside of the puzzle part. But anyway, this is what I was put on earth to do. And we're talking about Steven Spielberg, his movies. Now, blessed are those that know why you were put here. There's a lot of people that go through life and never really know that. And you have to sort of come up with it yourself. It's not something that at a certain age it sort of happens. And I would venture to say, just from my own experience, if it doesn't happen to you by the early 30s, you're sort of in trouble. But Casey says that you come here for a special purpose. And that is why I say, because that is part of a big growth that we're doing. The soul is the part that's in God's image and lives on. So the soul comes here to grow some. And this concept doesn't fit in at all with what Ed Casey says about, and what the church says. As a matter of fact, he was not very well, I hope I say this right, liked by the conventional church because he conflicted with some of their beliefs. And one of the beliefs is incarnation. Now, if I remember my history, and I won't be able to say the names correctly, but I believe it was in about 330-something other, Constantine called a meeting of religious people, and what his purpose, it was political, because he was wanting to stop some of the wars and fighting going on. And they were supposed to come up with sort of a, I guess you'd say, a common religion. And they got to fighting and fussing, so the third day they threw a high-level priest, I can't think of the right, bishop out, and later he was forgiven in the end because he would not accept the Trinity. They got in arguments such as that. Well, one of the things that got lost was reincarnation. And the idea was that it was too complicated for some of the average folks. And I believe they were probably right on that. But when you think back, what, that's 1700, 1800 years ago, I think they're probably right. As a matter of fact, I think they're probably right today to some extent. Because if you just stop somebody on the street, you believe in incarnation. Oh, no, no, no. You never heard of it. If you study a little bit, it'd be another story about it. It is so logical and common sense. And we're back to synchronicity. And then in Barbara's bit here, where she had a quote from Edgar Casey, it just fell in place there too. Because he says, an error we refuse to correct has many lives. Now that can be taken two ways. One, it has a life in it, it'll keep coming back to you. If you have a problem and it keeps coming back, you know that's your problem. That's one way to identify it. So another viewpoint of it, and I really think this is what Casey was talking about, you'll have to come back again. And jokingly, I often say to somebody when we just talking off the cuff, you know, I say, hell to me is when I get back home and I go through my evaluation and I do my own evaluation. There'll just be some elders there to assist me and make me feel a little more comfortable, I guess is the word. If I come up with, I didn't do well enough, I got to go back. Now that's hell. And Casey says at least 30 lives to sort of make the loop and advance on. Now that doesn't mean you're in heaven, it merely means you get to go to a higher level to advance some more. You just about never get through. It's just a lifetime job to get back home. Well, anyway, the synchronicity just falls in place because the song, Amazing Grace, remember John Newton worked for the East Indies Company delivering a slave ship, doing the slave ship. And he was in a storm and he thought he was going to lose the ship. He literally he was not a religious man, but he got down on his knees and prayed to God that if he would save the ship, that he would work for him the rest of his life. The ship was saved, he delivered the slave, got back to England, and became a minister. Now the sad part, the ordinary church there did not accept him. They did more of a chanting. Songs like we're doing here was unknown at that time. And the poor fellow never got to really have his own church, but he did, so we would say, preach from church corners. And it's very sad to think of the gift that he left. Well, I hadn't got to it. I better get to my talk, hadn't I? me to condense. There's so much about education. It's very difficult for me to bring it down to just a 30-minute type deal type thing. But I'd like to go over a little bit of the man's life, a little bit of the institutions that exist now that's left behind. I have some sample books if you want to just look at them or you want to borrow. And then, let's see, what was the other part? I'd like to hand out and go over some things that he said. He was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1877 out on a farm. And his mother used to say, apparently they were as poor as Joe's turkey. I never knew who Joe was, but his turkey was always poor. And when he was I don't know the age, but probably 7 or 8, he heard a very convincing minister. He came home and went out into the woods for a length of time by himself and had a talk with God that he wanted to be a healer, that he wanted to help people. And later, when he was a little older, probably preteen, he was hit with a baseball in the back, and it changed his personality. I mean, he was just sort of like today's teenager, you know, uncontrollable, just into things. And that went on 3 or 4 days. And then one night, they managed to calm him down and get him in bed, and he told them, if you would get, and he named about 4 herbs, and some diced up, crushed up onion and put under my head, it will help me. And the next day morning, he woke up cured. He never had that problem again. So that was the beginning, sort of. Now, he didn't like to accept the fact. He never did, really. Am I doing this? What I'm doing, is it wrong? Am I doing the right thing? He always had that little guilt that would come into it. And then when he got, they moved to town when he was around 10 or 12 years old. He was closer to his father. He was closer to his grandfather than to his father. I take it his father had to work a lot of time and hard, and he was a Woodsman of the World salesman, it's an insurance. I think it still exists now, as far as I know. I think it's part maybe of some men's organization of Woodsman of the World. And Casey worked with him a while with that, but he said that after his grandfather died, that he had an experience where his grandfather appeared to him, and they talked just as we would talk right here. He also saw auras about people. One day he was on the, I believe it was the post office, some steps he was starting up, and he looked up and he saw a man that he knew from the bank. And he saw an aura, colors apparently have a lot to do with aura, and he saw an aura that meant death. And it upset him. He just ducked and went the other way, and 24 hours later, that particular man was dead. So when he was probably in his late 20s by now. He was still in Hopkinsville, and his voice began to go. And he got concerned that he was losing his voice. And it happened, by the way, as a sidebar here, that is why he got into photography. He went to Selma, Alabama for 12 years as a photographer. He thought that wouldn't require much talking. It's something he could do with a very weak, no voice. And there was, back in those days, you know, troubadours and people would come to theaters, opera houses, and do 2 or 3 days or whatever, and then move on. So there was a hypnosis that came through, and he and Casey got together, and he told him that it was a matter of nerves, and it was restricted blood vessels, and that, in other words, it wasn't anything so serious. It was just sort of a problem of his own. But this particular man named Hart had to move on. But there was a local fellow named Lane that was also calling himself a hypnotist, and he got together with him. And he suggested to Casey, let's try this. Let me hypnotize you, and you do your own correcting. And so that's what they did. Casey himself, under hypnosis, working with the man, that it was all right, you just tell it to go away, and it slowly, it took 2 or 3 weeks or longer, but it slowly, after that, went away, and he regained his voice. So he moved to Selma. Now, I don't know why he picked Selma. That's way down south. But while he was down there, The school superintendent in Hopkinsville called him. His 5-year-old daughter, they had carried to the best doctors around at that time, and were not having her. And she was getting into the state that she was having spasms. And so he asked Casey if he would come back and do a reading on him. And poor Casey, he had never taken any money for anything that he did for people, like healing nature. But that was the first time that he took something, and what it was a ticket on a train from Selma to Hopkinsville. And when he did a reading for the girl, he says she's got an infection. Her sacroiliac is infected and it's spread in her body and sort of concentrated up in her brain, and that's the problem. And he told the mother, you take a peach seed. Now, as kids, I don't know, country people do, maybe y'all didn't, but there's a peach seed. You know, the seed, when you eat a peach, you got a seed left. Well, now inside that, there is a inner pith, I'll call it. Now, you have to take a sledgehammer almost to bust it, but that was usually fun to get out all these rocks with a hammer. But we were well instructed to never eat a peach seed. It's poison. It looked about like I was thinking, an almond but smaller, is I would say. So, of course, we would look at whatever, just like cattle don't eat certain things because they just know, you know, well, we was that way with peach seed. But he said, you take that peach seed, and he told her a certain way to prepare it, and give it to her, and within 12 hours, follow up with, now this she had to go to the pharmacy in Hopkinsville to get. And she did go to the pharmacy. He says, that's a little unusual, I don't have it, I'll have to get it out of Louisville from the warehouse. So, remember then, things didn't move like they do now. To make a phone call, you had to pick up the phone and listen. If nobody, used to 8 was on the one line, and if nobody was talking, you had to hang up before you crank. Now, you see in movies, they don't do that. They just crank. Don't work. Because when you're off hook, it shorts the line out, see, and it doesn't work. So then you pick up again. Operator the switchboard, see a little flap come down. Then she picks up a card and go in there. Operator. Then you would say, I'd like to call Louisville, and if you want to talk to an individual, it costs more. So most people do station to station. You take a gamble that the person you wanted was there, see. And when you got through talking, everything was over. Again, operator, how much that call cost? Because most long distance, a lot of long distance calls was neighbors. They just come in from all over. I know I was an area boy when I was before a teenager. You have to go to the neighbors, you got an emergency call, come to the phone, that kind of thing. And you had to know what the charge was so they could pay you. Okay, now back to where we were. The warehouse came back to the pharmacy and says, I thought I had it, I sure I had it, but I can't find it. So the pharmacy goes back to mother. She goes to Casey. Casey says, tell that pharmacy to tell the warehouse to look on a certain shelf behind a certain thing, and he'll find it. A few days later, here that appeared. So the mother was ready then to give the portion, and 12 hours later, she did this, whatever it was that she had gotten special from the pharmacy, and the girl was cured. And the woman, the mother of the girl says, I remember now, we were out riding, and we got out of the buggy just to look around, saw her in the woods, and she fell and hit her tailbone against the step on the buggy. As you know, a buggy just has something about that big around to put your foot on to get in and out. And she hit her tailbone, and weeks later it got infected, and that started her sickness. So the girl was healed doing this. And doctors studying that later said, had she not followed up with that particular prescription, it would kill her. So that's the kind of thing that Casey did. And he stayed at Selma for 12 years, and then he moved to Virginia Beach. Now that would have been in 23, I believe, 1923. And somebody asked him, why did you pick Virginia Beach? Why did you go there? He says, well, it's a safe place to be. And somebody else picked a little, so what do you mean? And he referred to the sand. Now, I don't know, that's as far as I can go with that. He referred to the sand. It makes me wonder, maybe somewhere down the way, building material will be short and they can use sand to make glass, say, instead of wood and stuff that we use. I don't know, but that was his answer. And that's where the organization is today. Now, the organization is ARE. You don't say it that way, just a minute. It's the Association for Research and Enlightenment. Now, I have on notes here, like places on there, you can go to the computer and look up and so forth. But in 29, he was wanting to establish a hospital. Now, a hospital then was probably called a sanitarium or something of that nature. It was holistic. You see, it was 1913 that we got off on all the prescription stuff. Even up to 1960, half of what you go to the pharmacy and buy was natural. The drug company just processed it. It was natural. Well, they got the idea that if they could get stuff and patent it, that they could make a lot more money. And that's where we are today. You just better get anything natural now. You got to go with somebody holistic. Well, he wanted to get something started. They were very popular around the turn of the century. Like Kellogg, for example. The cornflakes man, this was in the late 1800s. He had, up at Battle Creek, he had a terrific one. And he invented cornflakes because that was a food that he thought the people needed. It was good for them. And he came up with cornflakes. Just a little sidebar here. His brother-in-law, double brother-in-law, they married sister, Post, was a real businessman, money man, while Kellogg was more of a holistic man, Edgar Casey type man. And they didn't get along. So Post got fed up with him and just went off on the side and essentially made a different kind of cornflakes and called it Toast, I believe it was. And I think you can still buy it today. That family has a very interesting history because they're also deeply involved with the Urantia group, which is another day, another story. But anyway, now back to here. Casey has a university and a hospital that the family got back. They lost it in 29 because a man that was supporting him, that he had done almost 500 readings. He was a big Wall Street tycoon, and when the Wall Street collapsed in 29, he had been supporting Casey and was building this hospital for him. And at that point, of course, the money ceased, and it fell by the wayside, and it was 1956 before the family sort of got it back in their own hands. And it's a beautiful, nice place now, and also it's a university. I don't know much about the university, but it must be fairly active because people go there just to write books. Okay, now let's get back to what they write about. Casey had a young lady come to see him, or he was looking for help, because his wife Gertrude was doing the hypnotic part. She didn't have to do much. She was more of when he was ready, she would have little notes written out and tell him what they were looking for. And here's the way it would go. By the way, his son, Hugh Lynn, the oldest son, which has been dead for some years now, also helped out in that. And now, other people could be there. It wasn't a secret type thing or anything, but in case he would lay down on something like I'll say a couch, a sofa or some kind. And it would take him 15 to 20 minutes to sort of hypnotize himself, if that's the right word. And then he would say, I'm ready, or something to that effect. And she would give the name and address of a person. He did not have the person to be anywhere in the world. It didn't matter. See, because he was going off in the ether, in the clouds, see, for his information. One time, a man in Chicago had wanted to do a reading, and they got to this point, and after a long delay, he says, I can't locate it. And they just had to sort of cancel and move on from there. Well, a few days later, when they heard from the man, he says, I understand, because the bus I was catching was late, and I didn't get home. I wasn't home. And you see, he was looking at a particular address in an apartment in Chicago, and the man wasn't there. Now you say, how did he know this? Well, his explanation was, when he was ready to come up with this information, he did not remember anything he said. Occasionally he would say, what did I say? But he described it this way. Have you, as a kid, again out in the country, in spring cleaning, mother would go out and hang quilts on a long clothesline, just end to end, and we kids would have a ball. We'd pull it apart, and get between the quilt and run down it and that kind of thing. Well, now that's the way I imagined this tapestry to be. And he said an entity would meet him to help him, to direct him, and help him locate him. Now, this is the book of life in the Bible. And One way, well, I'll just say left, would be the past, and to the right would be the future. And don't read predestination in here, because there's so much in the future, your decisions as to what decisions you make, you take any route. If you hadn't made the right decisions for the right time and place to meet your wife, say, well, there's another wife down the way somewhere. It would just work out somewhere else, a different fork in the road, you know. But you took that route. You looked up on that route, or you fouled up, or which it may be. But anyway, that's how he got his information. And people would, there was a Cornette. You other people might remember Cornette. It was about a Reader's Digest size. And if Reader's Digest that was started by, I don't remember the name of the man and wife, but they collected good literature and condensed it and put it in the Reader's Digest. They did not take ads. It was something else to go back and read in the 40s or early 50s, Reader's Digest. It's a different ballgame than what you get today. It's real junky today and full of ads and appealing to sort of the youth whims and that kind of thing. But it was similar to it, but a line of heart. It would be more like Reader's toward what Reader's Digest is today. Now that's Cornette, and somebody wrote an article on him on that, and that got so many people coming to it. And in the process, not long after that, a paper in New York, newspaper, put an article out on it. So the poor fellow was just inundated with people coming to it. 2 a day was plenty for him. 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. But he got to where he was doing 7 or 8 a day. And it just wore him out. So I believe it was the 3rd of January, 1945. He had a heart attack and just left us. And they brought him back to Hopkinsville. If you go into Hopkinsville today, on Highway 41, that's coming from the north, going into Hopkinsville, you will come to Riverside Cemetery, and there you'll see a little thing about him. The city is beginning to take some pride in him now, and of course you can visit his gravesite and so forth. In Hopkinsville, the last weekend of March had a little blowout, starting Friday afternoon and going to Sunday morning. And you could go, and they would be a hickness there, and they'd have some stage things and whatever. I don't know the exact program. But on Saturday, you could visit some of his places. You could go to where he worked. And he, as I said, he sold books. He also sold insurance. You could see places. I'm not so sure. They may have, with a bus tour, take you out to the area he was born. And I don't know exactly. It's a few miles out of Hopkinsville. I've always been interested just really where the community. Back then, you see, little communities was named just 2 or 3 or 4 miles apart. I remember a little place, and it was just a home now, but still, people refer to it. When you get to Snell, start looking for so-and-so. Well, Snell, in past, was a little store by a man that ran it and had a house there. Well, that's the way back then. I just wondered where it would be. I'd like to know just where it was born, not that it's important. But also, I'd like to add that Gladys Davis, later married to Turner, when she came and got a job with him, she stayed with him. The rest of his life, she was with him. So while Gertrude, his wife, would sort of be the director, Gertrude, everything he said, did in shorthand. And later, she would transfer those to, ordinary records, or files, I think they call them. And she did over 14,000 of those in 20-something years. It's just hard to imagine. I've seen a picture of the files, just about as far as you can see, the little boxes thing they put files in, on high shelves and so forth. But Gertrude also got some help from the elder son. And by the way, they had a middle son. I can't remember the youngest son's name, but they had a middle son that lived 2 months. And some years later, he was doing a reading on a 12-year-old boy. And Gertrude, a mother, they always the sharpest in these cases, recognized that he was a reincarnation of that baby. So I thought that was very interesting. Well, moving on, there's also, it's called BAAR.com. That's the doctor's name, and I believe it's in Pennsylvania. It's not anywhere where every case is exceptionally is. But he's a holistic doctor, and he and his wife, she's a hygienist. They run that, and you can pull it up on the internet, and you can buy stuff you've never heard of there that pertains to what Casey would talk about. Lots of things that he used. Of course, I know 100 years later it makes a difference, but you can buy just about anything there. So it'll be interesting. I have it listed here. You can just look there. I've ordered some from it, and it seemed fairly expensive to me, but I'm a cheapskate anyway. Okay, then there are groups that, by the way, Memphis, about I believe it's the early first weekend of June, is having a big blowout down there. And a grandson of Edgar Casey is going to be there and speak. And I haven't looked at the program on it, but I'm sure it's at least a 3-day event, and interested people go to those things to learn more. And it's a good way to meet people. It'll be a good way to meet. Like I met people sometimes that I talk about, actually be surprised that I met them because I went to something like this. One of them was in a restroom, but we had a nice conversation. He wrote the Book of Knowledge. Very interesting Jewish person. Okay, these are scattered all over the world. Casey's known all over the world. Some people say that he's as comparing to Nostradamus. To me, Dr. Damus doesn't even hold a light to him because Dr. Damus was so secret. Or somebody's got to read it, tell you what he said. Well, that doesn't quite cut it with me. When you read Casey, you know what he's talking about. And I understand why Nostradamus did what he had to do, but I mean, I wouldn't put him in the category at all. He just predicted. Casey was not a prophet. This is why I admire him so. He merely did his thing, what he was put here to do, and people now go, and the computer reads freedom, and they can go to write on, say, dietary things. Well, they'll just pull up a little he said here, a little he said there, a little he said somewhere else, and they begin to make sense out of it and write them a book. And so that's what some of these books are. I'll give you an example. Let's see if I can find it right here. I looked pretty good on the internet and couldn't come up. You know, if you can keep your body pH above 7, you're much healthier, and they say you just really can't get cancer. Cancer thrives in an acidic body, acid. And so I've been for some time trying to work to get my pH up. I can't hardly get up 7, let alone above 7. But anyway, I looked and looked, and you know when I found a good book? At Casey's bookstore. And I mean, it went into more than I was looking for. It's something else. It's a woman's picture on there, but a man wrote it, not that that mattered. But now, 2 ways that you can get to Casey information. One, of course, is just go to the library and borrow books and that kind of Bible books. But there's these groups that are scattered around. You can, if you're in the area anyway, join them. There's one, they call it at Paris, Tennessee, but it mainly works out of Murray, Kentucky. And they meet on Wednesdays. I believe every other Wednesday they have a meeting. There are 2 in Louisville. Now, don't tell you that this particular group just dwells on Casey alone, they dwell on Casey's knowledge, but you might go to a group and they'd be concerned about Atlantis. You know, he said it's going to rise again and all that kind of thing. You might go to another and it's something to do with mythology. You can just name any subject in all these readings. Now remember that over 14,000 that's recorded and that you can now pull up and work with is probably about half of what he did. Because getting started, they just didn't get organized and get things done. Like the man that went broke and he lost the hospital, he done close to 500 just for him. And on my handout, if you see a number after a short little bit of something Casey said, what that is telling you is the number of his reading. Of course, if you were there at the Institute, you know who it was and that kind of thing. But that identifies who the reading was for, and if there's a -2, that meant a second reading that they did for him. So you could get all the readings together. Now, if that interests you at all, for over $100. It's $30 a month, by the way, to join Casey's group in Virginia Beach. And you get a lot for it. Right off the bat, they'll send you, provided you furnish them the time and place, exact place where you're going, they'll send you several pages of the next year's horoscope. And it's so detailed, I can't make much out of it. You know, we looked at those 80 degrees or something else and all that kind of stuff. You know, I sort of scanned it over and looked at it, but it's so detailed, it doesn't mean a lot to me. But if you at home, they have a wonderful package. This is 2 CDs or DVDs, works on Apple or whatever, from XP up. And in the middle, there's a nice little booklet with some photos and some history and that kind of thing there. And also instructions, you know, getting it up and running. Now there's a picture of all of those files I was talking about. It's something else. But they run sales. So if you want something, just hold your tater for a little while. And oftentimes, that's how I got this book, by the way. They put together, it's just like synchronicity. It's just synchronicities all around me, see like. They put together 4 books. A member gets 20% discount to start with, but they'll run specials, maybe with free shipping, or another 10% or whatever. And then they put little packets together. There's 4 books on this particular subject, by the way, that goes together well. And I ordered all 4 books. I can't tell you right now just how much it was, but it was very reasonable. Now, you can get some rather fancy books, such as hardback like this, Casey, Edgar Casey, Modern Prophet, and it's actually 4 books in one, 4 volumes in one, all in one book. Or you can get little.
Let me ask you one thing first. I'm confused. He was basically a healer and a medium, yet he had these when he would go into these trances. He would.
That's only when he was a healer.
Right. He would get messages, and he would give those readings. Do you have an example of one of the readings, or what kind of things did he tell you?
Well,
he obviously didn't make good readings to financial guys because he would have told about the stock crash.
And also he got involved with some people in the oil industry in Oklahoma, and that did not work out either.
Okay.
And now this is just
an example.
Right, and me putting it together, when it came down to financial money making, it just didn't work well. Yeah. Because he was in the that's what he came here to do, was heal.
Okay.
Well, it might be about time for me. By the way, I've got on here, the region we're in is ARE Heartland Org. Sounds like a UU organization, doesn't it? But if you want to contact somebody for this area, that would be who, and I have the phone number here and so forth. There's 2 in Louisville, by the way. And I don't think I looked, if I didn't pick up any in Evansville, I maybe didn't look well enough. These groups.
Is there anyone in his family is healing or a part of the Virginia Beach?
Not to my knowledge. No.
So all his grandchildren are just kind of.
Oh, by the way, early on, some years ago, I was told by somebody here in town that Mary Brown Hood, they thought was a great niece of Edgar Casey. You know, she's the one that runs the art museum. And so I said, started approaching the subject one day to her, and I could tell that she was uncomfortable. You know, sometimes people with sort of a noted person, some want to talk and brag a little, and others go the other way. They just don't want to talk, or whatever the reason. And so right away I sensed that and dropped it. And so I don't know if some of your friends or you might sort of check that. But I just was told that. I don't know anything about it. Well, I was.
Does that book have some readings? Does it have some? I'm just want to get an idea.
Well, now, this won't be whole readings now. But wait just a minute. Let's see. I was going to say Carson's not out here. Is I going to ask him to pass them out?
I'll pass them out.
Yeah.
I
think
Scott, you probably have it covered.
But I don't have a whole reading.
No, I just want an idea of something.
And I want to comment on some of them once you get your sheet. By the way, I got another sheet to hand out too, but being a teacher, I didn't want to hand them out. You're not listening to me because you're reading the sheet. I'm dumb, but not that dumb. you're gonna do what I would do.
Thank you. Is it on?
Okay, now let me, are they out now? Okay, now go down to think on these. And I have some asterisks about the ones that I wanted to comment. How are we doing on time, by the way? I had to watch, fixing the car and forgot to bring it in. How are we doing on time?
Just 11:40.
Ooh, we get short, okay. I understand from not out to 12 we get shot, so let's move on.
No problem today.
It's no problem.
Oh, okay, okay.
There's no problem.
I want to add a little to some of these. Now, these are very brief because, you know, I couldn't make them too long. I'd rather have more of different ones. Number one, this to some would appear all on soul, yet also are as one. They were all of the same. The soul is eternal. Now, what that is telling you, and from other readings and things, that all souls were made at one time. And oftentimes, I refer, you know, she's an old soul. Now that needs some qualification, because right off we would say that Mother Teresa was an old soul. And she did act and do as an old soul. She had, because she was very advanced. Remember in New York, she was trying to do some her work in New York, and the codes got so complicated with her. She just couldn't meet them all financially, and it was so irritating. She just dropped the deal because she just went back to somewhere else where they'd cooperate with her a little more. But, okay, but also now I want to remind you that a soul may come back here because it has a weak point that needs to be worked on, and you might just see it as a bum on the street or something. Okay, now let me give you an example of that. You remember when Bill talked about, I may not say the words right, but Icky was here as an alien. They came here 450,000 years ago because they needed gold, the Palladians, to protect their area. Gold, you know, is the heaviest metal that is not radioactive, and it's very extremely stable, very heavy. In some way, they would put it out in the atmosphere, and a ray that the enemy would come in to zap them would be deflected back or off or whatever, so they needed gold. So their astronauts came here to Africa and mined gold for about 200,000 years, and finally they got tired of it. Now, Enid was the brother of Enki, and he hardly ever came here, but he was the one that cracked the whip. And in the meantime, while the aliens, after 2,000 years, started somewhat rebelling and complaining, the sister Isis came here to take the thing, us way down the way, that wasn't capable of mining and doing things very intelligent. She was going to modify us. That was her goal. And as is happening today, it didn't work too well. So things that you see of mystical type animals like a goat with a human head or a horse with whatever really existed because Enid saw what was going on. By the way, one point I want to make. Edgar Cayce, one of his incarnations here, was a priest working where he would try to work with the people that they had messed up on. I take it he was working with them more of a middle state. I don't know. I don't think it was in as ISIS. ISIS was genetic and actually modifying people. And now he was a priest working as a healer at that time. Now, to contrast that, I'll try to get back to this in a minute. I'll contrast that. His last life on earth was as a man up sort of in the northern part of the United States, way back in about late 1700s, early 1800s, somewhere in there. I can't bring his name up right now, but it don't matter. But he was just essentially a bum, sort of traitor type thing, you know, fur. Like if you watch Daniel Boone on TV, these people that pass through sort of buying and selling things. That'd be the kind he was. And he was in a bar and sort of got in some trouble, and he traveled on a raft, and so he sort of ran out and went and got on his raft, and something happened. I don't know really what, but down the way, something happened to the raft and he drowned. And now that was his last life here as of that time, as of his reading. I mean, that was a reading that he gave that information. But this is also interesting because, let's see, here we go. And I heard him talk. A young man, when I heard him talk, was in his early 20s. But he says he's the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. He's not saying he really is, but he's saying he's the reincarnation. And his name is David Wilcock, and fairly good looks to him. So that brings on an interesting point, doesn't it?
So, if I understand you correctly, Edgar Casey knew what his prior incarnation
Oh, and
was?
that's the main thing he told people. But in other words, everybody came to him with a problem. And he would go into why they had the problem. And it might be a life hundreds of years back. It wasn't necessarily the last life. But you came here to polish off and do karma type thing. See, that's another thing that the fathers back in the 300-something of the Constantine didn't want to get involved with. Karma is too complicated. But I think even a Christian will sort of say, you're going to pay for all your wicked stuff.
You reap what you sow.
They just don't, they just figure God's going to do some magic, I reckon. I don't know, but they don't get into it. But yes, he would go back and give these readings. And that would help a person understand what was going on.
I don't mean to get you off base if I could ask you another question.
Yeah, sure.
So,
I'm off base anyway.
is it Edgar Casey's position that the soul decides when and if it goes back and takes another life, or is that, I mean, how does he have any insight into
First let me say that Casey himself did not really teach anything.
Okay.
He merely did his readings, and then people studying his readings come out with what he was saying. And yes, for example, with crib death, he says, which is very devastating to families that have that. But he said that when a child comes into the world, he's still attuned to where he came from. We lose that over, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I guess. You remember, I never did have one, but maybe some of you did. A little child has a playmate, you know, he's playing and talking with that kind of thing, you don't see it or whatever. Well, what he's saying is that is very real. That child actually does see that entity. And an entity to him means about anything except God, by the way. I mean, I would be an entity, you would be an entity, or he's talking about an entity back when it's in a certain life, so that term is very universal. But he says that once a child gets here and it realizes it's not what it thought it was getting into, or what it be able to solve the problem it came for, then it just, that's it. It just decides to go back. And that's great. And to me, that should be somewhat comforting to a family. And I don't mean the family mistreated or, you know, that kind of thing. It just meant the situation. And apparently the very last thing before you sort of leave the Ethernet, whatever the clouds are, is you make that decision. It's all your responsibility. Now that's one of the main points I want to get across, is we have willpower, and one of these right here, somewhere, that number 3, let me read it. Each individual has the choice, which no one has the right to supersede. Even God does not. See? You make your own choice because you're the one's going to have to live with it. And my dad used to say, you make your own bed, sleep in it. So that's the way it goes. And that bothers me with our government getting so intrusive in our life. I think so. Some of the rules that they may violate actually free will. And I think that's what we're here for, is to exercise free will. That's the way you grow. Now, let's...
David, to answer JP's question, he did do a couple of readings financially, and what I read was it made him so sick that that's not the reason he was put here, and so then he refused to do it anymore.
Yeah. That's about the same answer another way. Yeah. Yeah. He just learned it didn't work. Okay, each soul has a, number 2, each soul has a definite job to do, but he alone may find and do that job. That's why I say, blessed are you if you know why you came here. And if you hadn't figured it out, this is my experience, by about 30, early 30s or so, you might not. I know I was in my late 20s, I think. I got around to it. Another thing, and I just read this recently, it's not on the sheet here, but that he is in many mansions. By the way, here's a pamphlet on all the things that you can order from BAAR or whatever they say that. Well, it's the many mansions. book I'd recommend you read. No, that's not, well, I'm not coming up with it, but, And There Is a River. Minnie Mansions was written by a man that actually lived with Casey's for a long time. When I say long time, I mean years, but many months. But, well, I can't put my hand on it right now, but what a woman came to him that had marital problems. And she wanted to know sort of what would come out of that. And to make a long story short, what he said is that your purpose for being here is more important than your marriage. So if you marry somebody and it just doesn't work together type thing, let it go. Stick to the most important thing, which is why you're here. And I can just talk at length, going back with Edna and myself. At the time, I didn't realize all this, but you look at it so much different once she's gone. I'm looking back rather than sort of living today and looking ahead. But how so many things. How I supported her when she had to go to Nashville. I was working in research at Oak Ridge, and she wanted to get a master's degree in library science. And financially, I don't know how we did it, but she lived on nothing almost while she was getting her master's. Well, 10, 12 years later, you reversed it. Just things changed, and so I went back to get a second master in science rather than in teaching. And she did the same thing for me. She backed me to get my pilot's license. She backed me to become ham radio. And, well, I'll get back on something I backed her. It was writing a book. Now that's something. But I was a computer person on her book. And chauffeur to carry, photographer to do the best I could, take pictures. Well, now, that is all part of why we were here. See what I'm saying? And I don't feel at all that I sacrificed for she. And in genealogy, she did just as much for my family as she did for her. No question there. Well, anyway, that's time to get us here, isn't it? Is there any quick question? You want to look down the list? Learn the lesson well of the spiritual truth. Think well of others, and if you cannot speak well of them, don't speak. But don't think it either. Now, you remember poor Carter? You remember? I don't remember exact words, but he sort of made a reference that he thought it in his heart. I don't remember what it was about. Looking at a woman, I guess. And you know how the media just tore to pieces over that. So, but that was good advice. Don't think it either. Now that's the hard part. That's the hard part. Yeah. Don't act on it is the second part. Condemn no one, lest you yourself be condemned. That's I remember Prince Arnold had a hard time with that kind of thing. She supported the Cedar. She was the cornerstone of Cedar, but she really had a problem with. Because if you condemn, you're violating a rule, and therefore you are condemned. See, that's the way I take it. I don't know. But anyhow, any quick, maybe a question would be better than me going on down the list, because you can have this to take home and read. And Marty, since you're so good at handing out,
I got another one.
Behind the
Yes.
Okay.
David, what was the name of the first book? It was Allergies or Allergen? The first book.
Alkalizer.
What is it?
Alkalizer.
So you can go by and
It's alkalizing diet.
Yeah, this alkalizing. In other words, getting your pH.
Yeah.
And I think one of the worst things you can do with your pH is drink these darn soft drinks that carbonated. That's an acid drink, you know, when you drink. But I've got little paper I can check myself every morning. And for the life of me, sometimes, like this morning, I was right on 7. But sometimes I'm right on 6, and I keep thinking what did I do to make that difference? I just can't get it together.
Is it a little urine stick?
No, I do saliva.
Okay. They have them at the drugstore.
They probably do, but I get like we use in the lab where you pull off like a tape rolled up in a little dispenser, you know, like Scotch tape. But that's I've got it so handy to have every week if you want. I started to bring one, and I thought, well, we won't have time to get into that.
The diet, eating according to your blood type, is also an alkalizing diet. And you can get that offline. You can get, you know your blood type, and there's the foods that you can eat, the foods that you can kind of use some of the times, and some foods that you should actually stay away from. But it's eating, I forget the name of the book, Dixie knows the book.
There's one called Eat Right for Your Type.
That's it.
You know, I have that too. It's not an education book. It's
No,
a
but
book.
it's the same, it's getting your body in an alkaline state.
David, do you think you could go over this with us another time as a presentation, this sheet?
Well, I suppose so, yeah. And, my idea, you just could take it home at your leisure and read down, you know.
And both of us, I'd love to hear your input on
You
it.
know, yeah, okay.
How about that, Roger?
I was going to suggest that possibly when we have our discussion group start up again, that maybe you could come and it would be a little different, we're not under time pressure and all that.
Okay, that might be even better.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah. And I could even go into the ranching book. I gave a copy to the library, by the way, back before they moved. I don't know if you got the ranching book. There's something else too. Almost 2,200 pages. Woo. Okay, I guess that when time is up and whatever, I don't. I'd like to come through by and peruse the books and get sort of an idea of how they are. And as I say, you'll find them as reading books about any you can find anywhere. That's handy, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you, David. If you'll find your program, we'll say our closing words together. We extinguish this flame in our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry